of What's the Deal? And today I am really, really excited. I might even say a little bit nervous because I'm talking to someone that I met in 2019 that has actually been a bit of an inspiration to me. I'm not even sure if he knows that. But Alex Moore and myself, we're going to be talking about what's the deal with some of the recent changes that's been happening with Google and Apple and how those things are affecting marketers. Now, let's check it out. What's up? What's up? What's up? Good morning, everyone, again, and thank you very much for joining us on the What's the Deal episode. Again, I have not numbered the episodes, so I really can't tell you what number is this, but we are moving along nonetheless. And as I've said before, today I am really happy to have a colleague of mine by the name of Alex Moore joining me. Alex, I'm going to be bringing you in now. Good morning, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to
Oh,
see you.
yeah, same. I hope we're not waking you up too. I mean, it's 10 o'clock, right? And I know you're normally a busy dude. You normally respond to me at 6 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So,
Nah, I've definitely been up for a while. Been up, been to the barbershop already. We're ready to go.
right. Right. So, folks, let me give you a quick introduction into Alex. I met Alex in 2019. And as I mentioned, Alex is one of my two biggest inspirations in terms of the things that I do now. I met Alex at Inbound 2019, and he was actually speaking about certain things in the space of higher education and also marketing. And from just having conversations with him after that, it's really been a big drive for me to just really get to the level as to where Alex is. Alex is a senior partner in terms of marketing and technology at Stratagon. He's an entrepreneur. He's a marketing tech advocate, right?
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. International speaker, because every time I've seen Inbound thus far, Alex is always a big part of Inbound. And of course, he's an ABM expert, and we'll talk a little bit about what ABM is. Alex, if I've missed anything there, could you please give an additional introduction to the
N-
people?
No, I think we can probably cover stuff during the conversation.
Of
Although
course.
you are absolutely too kind. I appreciate the kind words, and the relationship has been equally beneficial. So thanks for having me on the show.
Cool. So, folks, today we are discussing something that happened over the last 12 months and then something else that happened over the last maybe 6 or 7 months. All right. And those things actually come from two prominent people or organizations that we know. And those organizations are Apple and Google. Which one you want to start with? You want us to start first with, Alex? Your call.
Oh man, I know they're equally impactful. Let's start with Google.
Let's start with Google.
Yeah,
All
let's
right.
start with
So
Google.
let me start by putting this up here first. So folks, in 20 I think it's about 12 months ago, Google indicated that they will be dropping third-party cookies. Right? Now, for me at the time, I really didn't have a proper appreciation as to what that was. But from paying attention, because again, my space is predominantly sales enablement, and customer centricity. But there was a lot of buzz as it relates to how is this going to be affecting marketers. And because I understand the relationship between marketing and how that helps generate leads for sales, I told myself I needed to pay attention to it. So the more that I read about it, I recognized that, yeah, this will have some level of impact in that industry in terms of those areas. Surprisingly enough, what I also noticed was that not too long after that, in September, Alex actually did a presentation for Inbound 2021 that spoke about no more cookie cutter marketing, which I found was really, really interesting. And then, of course, the rest of his presentation was really spot on. So, Alex, let's talk a little bit about what's the deal with this thing that's happening now with Google, and what is that impact about? So what is this, removal of third-party cookies? What's up with that?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you almost can go back to things that were happening even before the Google announcement. It all comes back down to data privacy. And if you want to go back to, gosh, I should have known the date exactly, but let's just call it something like 2019. COVID has messed up my years right now, but when GDPR became a thing, right? That was like the big thing on a global basis, that we were going to have just privacy challenges with respect to data, data privacy across the web. And it hit the EU, right? Hit Europe really hard. And of course, being that it's a global economy, it had impact here in the United States as well. And then after that, all of a sudden, we started hearing rumblings about what was going to happen within the Google world. And obviously, with Google's market share of Chrome being huge, anytime that they were to make a move within the browser, it's going to have huge impacts. I will say before we dive into Google that while Google's making this announcement, Safari as well as Firefox had already begun to block third-party cookies many months and years prior to. I don't know the exact date, but they already were doing it. But their market share was such that the impact was just not as big, right, potentially. So Google says, hey, listen, we are going to block third-party cookies, which for anyone who doesn't know, like the third-party cookie basically is when you go shop on Amazon and then you take a couple hops to another site and you see those, pair of shoes, perhaps. That's the third-party cookie that's making that connection. And quite frankly, my personal view is that third-party cookie has been vilified a little bit. I think we've got a need for more consumer control and privacy. So there's definitely some good that's going to come out of all this. But ultimately, Google has said, hey, we are going to block that. And for a marketer that's in like the digital advertising space specifically, that's like gold. That's how they are able to understand behaviors and trends of a person by way of a cookie, or a device by way of a cookie more specifically, and serve a relevant ad to them. So while I think cookies, like anything else, can be abused, there have been some really good things in that I actually enjoy browsing and sometimes seeing something that I didn't know existed, but the marketer has done a good job of putting something of interest in front of me. I think there are a lot of unintended consequences that could come from all this, but ultimately that's what this is all about. So once the third-party cookie goes away, that means that as an advertiser and as a marketer, which would include Google themselves, they're looking for other ways to anonymize, let's say, the targeting capabilities. So it's not a cookie. The question is, what will it be if it's not a cookie? And we have been assuming that there would be a solution over the last year, and really to keep kicking the can down the road, because I think that the solutions that have come up have not been very good, haven't been scalable, or they actually may impact others. This ecosystem of advertisers, it's not just about Google. Think about all the small publishers that are out here. Think about the bloggers who actually make money because they can show that little ad choices ad at the bottom of their blog. The reason that ad shows there and is somewhat relevant is typically because of third-party cookies. So the impact financially for Google themselves, as well as many in the ecosystem, is quite large. So they are trying to be responsible, I believe, in navigating it, which is taking time. And we'll see what happens in the next year. But it's definitely evolving.
Right. So as you mentioned that, because you started off by saying privacy was one of the main things, right?
Yeah.
And as much as we enjoyed you know, or sometimes felt as though, wait a minute, is Google reading my mind? But didn't really understand that. Didn't
Right.
really understand that if you're moving from, let's say, a Pinterest or Amazon, and you know those things are showing up thereafter, it's
Right.
because of those third-party cookies. So in some instances, it's been a benefit, but on the back end too, you've also had instances where it's been abused. Hence the reason why we're doing a, is it a Peter pay for Paul, Paul pay for all type of thing? Yeah.
Yes, maybe so. Yeah, I don't know if I would call it that or not. I would say that the industry has probably gotten too dependent on cookies
Right.
now, and I think that consumers are more in tune today with respect to how information has been used, and I think we're all just trying to navigate a place to, I don't know, make everyone feel more in control. I do also believe that there's a fair amount of misinformation out there, particularly within like legislators. I think that the legislation side of this is that we have, in some cases, people making decisions about topics that they don't really know that much about. And if you watch some of the hearings, and you can hear this, you know, with some of the lines of questioning and the like. So I do think that the industry has a responsibility to educate as well, to navigate, you know, where we are.
Right. So on a humorous side, we have Kevin saying that he likes cookies and pie and cake.
I see that. That's right,
Right?
Kevin. Yeah,
Yeah.
Google's definitely trying to put us on a diet.
Right.
So, you know, let's talk about the impact though, right? Because
Yep.
ultimately, we're not going to be able to control whether or not cookies are here or what form they're in. Just to give you some ideas, like what were some of the things Google's been doing? So one of the first things they were doing when I gave this last presentation that you referred to is during inbound was a thing called a FLoC,
Yes. I remember
federated
seeing that.
learning of cohorts, which basically means that instead of me targeting you specifically, I'm going to target a group of people that have similar attributes, which makes it a little less individualized, let's say, right? Well, that seems to be going by the wayside right now. And the latest thing that they've come out with is a thing called topics, where they're really trying to use more contextual based targeting, that is, again, less granular. So the question is one, does that work? From a technology standpoint, the one thing that they're doing is they're moving and targeting from the ad server, which is typically where targeting is taking place, to the actual browser. So now with things moving to the browser, we'll see, you know, what that means in terms of the impact and the user's control and how that works. But
Mhm.
ultimately, the question is from me as a marketer representing our clients is what's the impact to them? And ultimately, it means less precision, and it means that it probably means you can expect to spend more in your advertising spend to get the same results in terms of reach, click-through rates, these kinds of things. And I think from a, not I think, I know from a metric standpoint, all the metrics that we have gotten used to over the years, we sort of need to put those aside and use them as reference points. But
Mhm.
truly, we're going to have a new baseline for what ad performance looks like. For example, costs, you know, CPM costs, CTRs, all these metrics are going to change because this new way of targeting is going to change the ability for us to look at those measures the same way.
All right. So I have two follow-up questions, but let me just start with and again, I'm coming from the standpoint of being if anyone is maybe thinking of this, how would a FLoC or with topics be different from pixels?
Yeah. So I think it's really more about how precise, right? Pixels are pretty precise. Today, you know, I could pixel you and Kevin and a few other folks, and I could put an ad in front of you very specifically
Mhm.
because you took an action. Where now, if you raise it up in altitude and you think about a flock, you think about a topic, it's more broad. You know, it may not be about a specific action, but it may be a group of actions that you've taken. The other thing is they are looking to make sure that they've got critical mass. So, in other words, if it's a very small group, then that's not going to be a targeted group or targetable group because it's too small and it may put the identity at risk. So you've got to
Right.
have enough critical mass of a group taking a certain group of actions to put, in this case, ads in front of them. So it just really increases the altitude of the targeting, which means that you're going to get some that's like, man, that's going to be a great target, spot on. But then you're going to get some that's going to have what I like to characterize as over spray, or you're going to have some spillover, which means that I'm now spending some ad dollars on some folks that may not be precisely within my target audience. They still may be okay, but they're not precisely in. So conventional wisdom would suggest that it's going to cost you more to get the same results.
Okay, cool. So in an instance like that, so we spoke about like what it is. We spoke about the impact of it, pro or con in terms of its abuse or non-abuse, and how well people use it. How do marketers move forward? Because if it's one of the things that I have really been trying to be an advocate here for, is really for marketers to have the ability of doing their job and understanding that things like third-party cookies uh, has been able to help marketers do their job. Um, what will be the way forward for markets? So I understand. Let's say that they're even looking like for things like FLoCs. I think that in your presentation for Inbound, you spoke about. I think one of the things you started off by saying is kind of going back to basics. Like, what is that? What would that mean? What would be some of the new steps or readjustments that they may have to make?
Yeah. So I think from a what do you do as a marketer? First and foremost, I think we should make sure this is not doom and gloom, right? This is not
Right.
something that means that you can't recover from it, because you can. I do think it's going to force marketers to be better, right? Be better marketers, because now things like content and focus information is going to be at the forefront
Mhm.
of a marketer's kind of execution. So doing that first and foremost is important. Know your prospects, know your personas that you're going after, understand their pain points. What are the things that they're really struggling with? Make sure you have thought through those things, because that's going to be important. If you think about noise, you think about advertising in general, the question is does the message that you put in front of me really resonate or not? Right. So if we can be better there, I do believe it is going to create a more skilled marketer, because just have to be better. Um, in terms of like, what do you do different besides hopefully being just back to basics, a better marketer? Make sure you still have the right technical stack so that you can measure what you can measure. The thought of just going on to any of these platforms, putting an ad in, and just launching it is really somewhat irresponsible. You really need to be thinking about that full user path and flow, and make sure that you're tracking things appropriately, to make sure that you actually can do some postmortems and know, hey, was I effective or not? So for me, those are the two things. Those aren't huge things, but they're things
Mhm.
sometimes that I think we've gotten lazy with sometimes as marketers. Unfortunately, the barriers to enter this space are so low that it's really easy just to go on to pick a tool of choice, launch an ad, and tell a client, hey, you're running it. And that's really irresponsible.
Mhm.
The real challenge for marketers, I would tell you though, is being able to communicate that value to the client, because the things that we're talking about take lots of time. If you think about wanting to target different segments and track them appropriately, you have different creative sets, you've got different URL strings, you got different tracking mechanisms that you can use, and to configure them really do take time. And that time at the end of the day equals money, right?
Money.
In terms of the agency effort. And that sometimes can be tough to swallow when I definitely have seen situations where the agency time and effort has exceeded the ad budget.
Right.
They're spending $4,000 or $5,000 in an ad buy, and it's taken that much or more to do the configuration, the creative, and setup and management of the ad. That sometimes can be challenging to communicate in terms of value.
Right. How would that? I like what you said there too, because I mean I think the main thing now. I mean, and you could tell me if I'm wrong. By now improving on your skill set, because I see Kevin is saying here, he's sort of reverberating what you said, that the barrier is low, but the skill set is higher. So which means that to be an effective marketer, because you could use any tool, right, as you mentioned, but to be an effective marketer, your skill set in terms of understanding what is required, the buyer, and stuff like that is important. My question to you would be, how does that now change? Like, what metrics are used to now measure that? Would it be the same set of metrics, or would it now be different from a metric standpoint? I don't know.
Yeah, I think some of the metrics are the same, but it's the standards that are different. So, for
Mhm.
example, if we were talking about traditional programmatic advertising, I'd tell you industry standard is somewhere around 0.14% click-through rate. That's like the standard. I don't know that that's going to hold, and not that 0.14 is particularly high by my own standards. That is the industry blend, and we oftentimes are performing much higher than that. But if we know that that's a standard. However, going forward, I don't know that that's going to hold, because if you say, hey, the people that I'm targeting are not as precise any longer, one would assume that not as many people are going to click. Right. So for me, the core metrics are still the same, at least for this conversation. When we talk Apple, things will be a little different. But for this conversation, it's very much the same. It's just that the measures that we look at standards are different. Now, it's also going to be different based upon education, B2B, B2C. You know, I'm giving you a general, a B2B metric specifically, but it'll be different by sector, and everyone's got different performances when you think about their own niches. So I always encourage people to use it as a baseline, run your campaigns, establish what has been working for you, and then you can work for improvement from there. Because there are just there's a lot of variability into that metric and what it means for your individual company or client.
Yeah. So before we segue into Apple a little bit, there's something that you also mentioned that I just wanted to maybe have an understanding as to if marketers could maybe now start focusing on this, which was first-party cookies. So, one, if you can just give an explanation as to what first-party cookies are, and also now, like, you know, how valuable would that be, or if marketers should really still be paying attention to that. In that regard.
Yeah, really good point. And I think it's important to make sure people realize that first party, there is also second party. Let's not talk about it today because it's really a small part of the market. But there is such thing as a second party cookie and then third party. The whole Google thing is 100% third party cookie. That's the point. On the first party side, it's my website. So if you guys go to stratagon.com or brandgen.io, another brand that we have launched, and you see the little thing that says, you know, accept cookies, that's a first party cookie, meaning it's a cookie associated with my digital asset, my website. And that enables you to be able to track what I'm doing on my site. So that's great. But also on my site, I might drop a Facebook cookie or a LinkedIn cookie because I want to retarget you on some other site. That's the third party cookie. So now working on first party cookies or any kind of first party data in general is important. So for you, first party data would be things like a first party cookie, as well as email addresses that you are able to extract from your inbound marketing efforts or whatever traditional marketing efforts you have, and ultimately use that data for things like email marketing and other kind of targeting. We still think that there's going to be some cookie matching with emails after all this is done, but the percent of match is going to be much lower than what it is today. So some utilization of that for advertising is still going to be a thing. We're just not sure exactly what the penetration is going to look like. So that first party data in general is still going to be gold. I mean, if you can imagine, anytime you've got rich customer prospect data, even in today's world, pre this cookie narrative, is still first and foremost the best data out there. So cell phone numbers, text messaging, WhatsApp addresses, all of those things where I've got direct contact with the target audience is still going to be gold. Right.
And so let me see if I can cleanly segue into that. So now that you have that first party cookie information, you bring the customer into your database. You would now want to use your tools to start, you know, nurturing, running campaigns out to your customers through email marketing, and I'm using email marketing as the main thing. But in September, Apple, and I'll put it here to share with the in September, Apple did this. Right? Apple said that as at September, well, they actually spoke about it in June, that they were launching their mail privacy protection coming out on iOS 15 and all of the respective other iOS platforms, really now to help the consumer, all right, or the reader. So again, when I saw this one, I was like, oh my goodness, so this is something else, you know, as it relates to, you know, how this may be affected, because I use email marketing as well, and I use the data received from email marketing, or even little things in HubSpot that will give me feedback about the customer's behavior. So my question to you again would be, how is this, like, from your perspective and your expertise and everything else, how are you guys seeing this impacting what is happening in your space?
Yeah, so this one is pretty dynamic. and this is a big deal. Both of these topics are really, really big deals. And I wish more people were talking about it, because unfortunately they're not. So for this one, what I would tell you is that there's a couple of things at play, and you've mentioned email, but we also still have the application, like the data privacy side as well, which if anyone is an iOS 15 user, you've seen these, right? You fire an app, you fire up an app and it asks you, do you want to share data with that app? So on and so forth. Maybe we'll hit that a little bit later. Specifically to mail, let's just make sure we sort of decode what the real impact is. First and foremost, we are talking about iOS 15, so the mobile device is the real focus. And we are talking about the ability to know a couple things. One, to be able to track, did you open an email, right? So everyone who's using any kind of marketing automation platform with the likes of HubSpot knows that you can go, you send out your marketing emails, and at some point you go back and you look at your open rate. And open rate has been a really key measure for us in the past. I think that we should temper what open rate means in the future. It doesn't mean that we dismiss open rates. It just means that open rates are maybe a little bit of a false positive, because one of the things that Apple has said they're going to do is to essentially fire pixels to make it look like everybody opens it. So you really don't know whether someone has opened a message or not based upon iOS 15. Now, ways to interpret your data might include things like looking and understanding what percentage of your user base is using iOS 15, and then also how much of the email is being opened on a desktop. I think it's also fair to suggest that in the B2B world, you may find that a lot of more in-depth research and the discovery process of, along the buying cycle happens on a desktop. So maybe I glance at it on my iOS 15 device, but then I go back and I open that information in my mail client. And right now it looks like that data is by and large still going to come through. So you still do get some data. So I would say, similar to the Google discussion, look at open rates as a bit of a trend, but don't look at it to fire your workflows, for example. Like that's one of the big things. If you say, hey, I'm going to send an email and I'm going to wait 24 hours. And for anyone who didn't open the email, I'm going to send it again. Or if you did open it, if you did open it, I'm going to go to the next step in the cycle, because that actually may yield a false positive for you, because you really won't know if they opened it or not. So just make sure you think about your messaging, because if in email number 2, you reference the fact that, hey, thanks for taking a read at my first email, that may not be true.
That's
so
correct.
You still may send that second one, but you may need to think about the contextual side of what you say in an email and what it means for actions that you think that the user has taken.
All right. So we also have Kevin here again saying that he thinks that the Apple's implementation of mail privacy protection will actually have a larger impact. And exactly what you said are things that I have seen to an extent. But there's one point that you just made, and I was trying to see how quickly I could have pulled it up on the back end, but I wouldn't try to do that now while you're speaking, which was, and this may be from a geography standpoint. So for us here in Trinidad and Tobago, when I first heard the news, I thought that there would have been an impact in terms of mail outreach. But there are a couple of things. One, we have a lot of folks with fancy phones that don't know how to use them. So I don't even know if they know how to switch that on. Right. Right. And then two, we also have a lot of folks I'd like to say Trinidad and Tobago that are actually on Android.
Right.
So even if that feature exists, which I'm not familiar, I recognize that when I was sending out my emails, one of the things I did go back to look at is what mobile operating system people were using, or what mail clients that they were using, and a lot of it was Google, right, or Gmail. So immediately I was like, okay, so I don't seem to have that. But in your space, because let's say iPhone may be the dominant partner. I'm not sure what the market share thing is over there. I could definitely see where that will have an impact. So I was just saying, from a geography standpoint, I do see a difference, and I was actually able to verify that on the back end with HubSpot. But for you, because that is your area, Alex, how do you now navigate that in terms of your marketing strategies and stuff like that? So because you just mentioned it, that it may be a false positive, but so what should be the next step as you're experiencing that?
Yeah, it sort of comes back to similar things on the ad side, where things like being better at subject line creation, right? Having better content within the email. In terms of measures, we're looking at clicks more, right? You know, clicks have always been looked at, but today we still do know that, right? If they click on the link and they find their way to your site, you're able to use that. So we're really just taking that metric one further point down and not stopping and starting just on open rate. We are also doing things with like send time optimization, trying to be better at understanding that, and we can optimize that specific to desktop. There's some third-party tools that we use to plug into our marketing automation systems that allow us to look at send time optimization, and that certainly is one of the things that we're using some technology to help out as well. I do want to make sure we mention, though, within the Apple world, while you know the open rate thing is one, the other piece is how Apple has this anonymized email that they use, that can use when you fill out a form or you respond to something. So we are actually starting to see that show up in some of our client accounts, and in some cases, clients are looking at this email address as a bad lead, and that may not necessarily be the case. It just means that it's an anonymous lead in terms of their email address, right? So I think organizations are still figuring out how they treat this email address that's a secondary email address. Like the credit card industry did this a long time ago, that said if you shop online, we'll kind of give you this series of shopping credit card numbers that are linked to your primary, but you never have to put your primary out there. It's really the same ideology here with Apple and what they're doing with mail. So I do think that in general, and that's true with Apple Mail. So in general, I think, again, depends on if you're consumer based, if you're B2B or B2E, then it may differ a lot. I think in the B2B world, we haven't seen this issue as much because most companies aren't using Apple Mail for their business email. But those that are using it for personal, that may normally send a Gmail address into you that's in an Apple Mail, I mean, you're one step away from that direct email. But I think the story is still out. I don't know if the impact of that one's going to be as large. But this, you know, again, email, another layer of the whole data privacy piece is going to definitely change how we do. And again, it'll force people just to be better marketers. Yeah. I think at its core, I believe that's in fact where we're going to land.
Yeah. So just to ask one quick question. So I actually forgot about the generation of a fake email. So that will definitely increase your bounce rates.
Not necessarily. I think it's still deliverable. It's just more of, you just don't have that exact one, which means if you think about targeting, that's tougher, right? Because right now, if I'm using, you know, my personal email address across sites and that's getting cookied and it's like it's connected to me versus these kind of ghost email addresses that don't have a direct connection, it's kind of tough to use that across the various marketing channels where we could use things like email address as a point of first party data.
Right. Man, I mean, hearing you break it down like that, I mean, initially in my mind, I had some concept that, you know, yes, it would be difficult, but as you just broke it down in terms of, the you providing the service to your clients and everything else, it's not easy. It actually pushes folks to really step, their game up, or as you said, fine tune the things that you're doing, or be creative in terms of your additional strategies. What areas or what different bits of technology would you say marketers should be using now, not to overcome Google or Apple's MPP, but just to just to use tools to be, as you said, better marketers? What are some of the things that you think that they should be using now from the tech side?
Yeah, look, I'll tell you, our classic tech stack that we really advocate for at a minimum is, first and foremost, a solid CMS that lets you to be agile and changing up what you place out there, allows you to have more personalized content where that is a thing. So you can be a little bit more personalized. So contextual relevance matters.
Right.
In addition to that, definitely have a solid marketing automation platform that lets you automate the things that we can. And a CRM that underpins that. In addition to that, it goes without saying, Google Analytics, which we have to have another talk about the new Google that's coming out and what that means for us. But making sure you've got Google Analytics running is important. And then in addition to that, we get into things like site tracking. We are really big advocates of having some type of IP-based site tracking tool set. So you understand
Right.
companies that are coming to your website. That's really, really important because anonymous traffic is just anonymous, but there is some rich IP level data that you can extract out of there that your sales and marketing teams might want to know if a particular logo was on your site today, even though they didn't submit a form. So go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think, and I believe we have that in HubSpot under prospects.
Yes, but it's not a legitimate, how do I say this? It's not as scalable and as enterprise of a solution as you would want. There's a lot of noise in there and it misses a lot. So that's really not, I mean, it's a nice to have in the tool, but if you're serious about getting that data, you're going to need to buy a third-party option.
Right. Cool.
Yeah. So,
I'm glad you said that, because there have been things that I have referenced to customers because of that. But as you mentioned, that there are other third parties that do that. That would be excellent to look at as well.
Yeah, there are really there's a lot of different options out there. I don't know, I'm hesitant to go pro one or the other, but if you just go out here and Google those, because I don't really have a real opinion about which one, honestly, but there's several in the space that will do that for you. And then there's ad tech. So think about what ad technology partner is going to help me reach my audience the best. 90% of our work is in the business to business space or something that's got a big organization associated to it. So for us, like account-based marketing and those kind of tool sets really align, which is why, again, the presentation that I did there was under the title of BrandGen.io, which was a company we invested in, which essentially is focused on B2B level targeting. And we're looking at all types of targeting methods, IP address being one, but we're looking at things that are not cookie based. So find a partner, doesn't have to be BrandGen, obviously, but find a partner that satisfies your targeting needs, infrastructure needs, and support to make sure that when you do go out here and spend an ad dollar, it's an ad dollar that's very much focused on the niche that you're focused in on. So those are really the key ones that we want to make sure we have. I think the last one I would mention is something that does site tracking.
Right.
So do something where you can actually go and do UX UI work, where you're able to follow mouse clicks and things like that. So you can get a sense for where you need to be better in terms of your overall web experience. So you can really see where users are having success and where they're having challenges in navigating the website that you thought you spent all this money and built this perfect site. And it was perfect to you and probably perfect to the designer and the developer and all that. But the customer is ultimately the decider of that, and being able to see that in real time is really important.
Yeah, that is a solid point, because again, and I do remember you had, as you mentioned it, I do remember that slide coming up that I think it was somewhere in the corner that did speak of UX UI, and it is an important thing as it relates to user experience and the interface and everything else, because if the customer doesn't like navigating a site, they're not going to stand by.
Yeah, so, we joke. I haven't seen a perfect site yet. We joke with clients all the time. We put so much blood, sweat, and tears into websites, and we think we've got them perfect. And I just think going in with that expectation is setting yourself up for failure. You really need to iterate and measure along the way.
Yeah, I think we when I was in the corporate sales days, we used to call that the best dressed from a proposal standpoint. So you will have the best looking proposal. It's all well laid out, but you don't win the deal.
Right. So, that's a good one. I'm gonna have to put that one in my toolbox. I haven't heard it quite like that before.
Yeah,
I like it. I like it.
Stressed, So Alex, I would love to say thank you very much for everything that you shared. If there's anything that you have to share for your marketers here, and of course those that's in the Caribbean and everyone else that sees this, that follows you, what would be a parting message that you would like to share based upon the conversation that we've had?
I think I'd just like to share on behalf of those that are, my fellow marketers out here, make sure if you're hiring a marketer, realize the complexity of this space. It's hard. This is hard. It's hard work. It may seem easy. And I think understanding the value and really valuing those who do this is really important. I think sometimes people just get tremendous sticker shock when they see either the rate card or they see the total cost of of a project and just not having appreciation for how much time and effort it goes in to be good. It takes a lot of sweat equity, a lot of expertise that has been learned over, in some cases, decades to be able to deliver the results. And then also know that this stuff takes time. It's one of the things, everyone wants everything fast and overnight. And it just is not the case. It's just not that easy. It's not that black and white. But look, vet your partners for sure. But certainly give them some grace and know that right now we're operating in an environment, particularly in the digital world, that is moving literally at the speed of light.
Yeah.
And the foundation that we have had over the last, let's say at least 10 years is literally changing. I think it's going to be fine. And we're all going to be here talking about, remember when back in 2022, in some years from now, but it's definitely very volatile right now. So yeah, go out here, be a good marketer, and it'll all work out.
Yeah. So Alex, I would like to say thank you so much for sharing, my friend. I look forward to seeing you at Inbound in September in person.
I'll be there. I'll be there in person.
Yeah. And for those of us who really enjoyed what Alex has been able to share, let me just put this up for you all to have a look at. Go check out Alex on his on his LinkedIn, and also wait a minute, where did it go? Share screen, share tab. There we go. And also feel free to check out Stratagon. So this is it here. But of course, you can also go and you could find Alex on LinkedIn. He's there on Facebook, but stick with the LinkedIn. Definitely get a lot more coming out in that space from him. So Alex, again, thank you very much. And thank you for everyone that's been on board with us for this this episode of What's the Deal? And we will catch you guys in the coming weeks. Peace.
Sounds good. Thanks.